So, several weeks ago we began to look at Psalm 2. We come to the conclusion of it tonight and look at the different voice of the Son. And we will see the voice of the Spirit in just a moment, and that will conclude this psalm. So we've seen David relating how the heathen rage. And this has prophetic implications. It was at the time of David being king, but it also has prophetic implications. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let's break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. In other words, they don't want any restraint. Like a 2-year-old, they don't want to be told what to do. And these are supposed to be the kings who the Lord sets them up to rule, and yet they do this. And so this was a great mystery to David. So the voice of the Son, the voice of destiny. Jesus, of course, is the legal Son of God. In verse 7 it says, I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my Son. So, in the New Testament sense, we are all adopted into the family, if you will. Jesus is the only one that was born in a manger, supernaturally, as the Son of God. And then Jesus is the legal heir in verse 8. Ask of me, God says, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Someone made the statement that the story of the Bible is about God giving a kingdom to his Son. That's a pretty accurate statement. The story of the Bible is shaping everything where it needs to be, so that in the end, the Son of God, the heir of God, receives this inheritance, the kingdom. And then he's not only the legal son, the legal heir, but Jesus will lead in that day of the Lord, that judgment that is coming. Read about it in verse 9. This is expository, one verse at a time. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. This is not the way Americans tend to think of God. Not the way that we tend to think of Jesus. And he is that gentle shepherd that calls us to peace. He is that. But one of these days he's coming back, and he's not going to be that. There's another layer to him. It's going to be judgment, and it's going to be painful. So then, in verse 10 and 11 and 12, the Spirit, the voice of finality. In verse 10, there's a challenge to the mind. So the heathen rage, and the Spirit speaks to them a voice of finality. He gives them a challenge in the mind, in that mind level. In verse 10, be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Someone jokingly said, you can tell a man, but you can't tell him much. A man joke. So, at that level of their mind, the Spirit speaks to these leaders and tries to convince them that they need to think about what they're doing. Now, I don't think there's much hope of them doing that, but God doesn't bring judgment without first putting the truth out there. And so he does that in this psalm. And then he gives a challenge to their heart in verse 11. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kings don't like to be told anything. They certainly don't like to be told to serve. But if you're not under the authority of Jesus, you're not in a safe place. And they're not. So when judgment comes, they've got a problem. And then there is a challenge that the Spirit gives to the will in verse 12. Kiss the Son. Make a choice. This is to their will. Down deep at the decision-making point in their lives, he says, make a decision. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way. when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. So this conversation in Psalm 2 is fascinating on a lot of levels, but it is a prophetic conversation that's taking place. There's this back and forth of the Holy Trinity, trying to get the attention of the leaders of the world, the ungodly of the world, the heathen of the world, if you will. But not only just the heathen, it also speaks of the people, the Jews. And they're right now, this psalm is relevant to them because they're outside the will of God. They don't accept their Messiah. So let's do a little bit of a timetable assessment of where we are prophetically. Israel being reborn was a huge big deal, a prophetic sign that God gave back in 1948. Jesus spoke of it in Matthew 24:32. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. In other words, we're at a transition point. When you see Israel become a nation, things are going to change. And a lot did change in the world. Israel became that cup of trembling that the prophet spoke of. Israel has been the focal point of all the troubles of the world. And they are to this day. And then the sign of the days of Noah and Sodom that Jesus spoke of in Luke 17. He said, as it was in the days of Noah. Okay, that opens up a whole lot. The days of Sodom, everybody, even non-believers, know what that means in the Bible. All of these speak about sexual perversion. Not just sex, sexual perversion. So with Noah, you've got the fallen angels coming down and having sex with the women, right? Perversion. And with Sodom and Gomorrah, you've got homosexuality. And we've taken it to a whole new level now. We're beyond homosexuality, and who would have ever thought it could have got more wicked than that? But now we've got all these gender issues. Gender fluidity. Today I think of myself as a girl. Tomorrow I'll think of myself as, who knows? A cat. Exactly. Seriously. That's a thing. Today in the news, American Girl published a Smart Girl's Guide. How many of you saw this? You know what American Girl is? American Girl is a doll. A series of dolls and a series of dolls. Big money. And, up till now, as far as I knew, it was good. Now it's not so much. So I want to go over to Prophecy Watch. And if you're not familiar, if you want updated news on prophecy, this is a great place to go on the web. Prophecy News Watch. Let's go there. And I just want to run the headlines today because it deals with all the issues that I was thinking about.
Those dolls, they make the dolls to match the child. You have
Yeah. So you go in and did they take a picture of the kid and they match it to that? Yeah. My granddaughter was big into that. So both of them. Here is American Girl takes wokeness to a new level with gender transition for 3-year-olds. Let's look at that article. Yeah. Yeah. So they published this book, A Smart Girl's Guide. And in that book, they say things, 3 to 12-year-olds who's targeting. If you haven't gone through, this is what the book says to these 3 to 12-year-olds. If you haven't gone through puberty yet, the book advises, the doctor might offer medicine to delay your body's changes, giving you more time to think about your gender identity. Another passage. Parts of your body may make you feel uncomfortable, and you may want to change the way you look. That's totally okay. You can appreciate your body for everything that it allows you to experience. Really, we need to be telling 3-year-olds that their body can be used. You can appreciate your body for everything that it allows you to experience and still want to change certain things about it. Even more insidiously, the book states, if you don't have an adult you trust, there are organizations across the country that can help you. Turn to the resource on page 95 for more information. You might not be able to trust your parents. This is the depth of wickedness in our time. And then we have an election that just, Mr. Warnock was elected yesterday. So that's not really the headline. If any of you thought the election was going to make any difference, I've been telling you for a half a year that it won't. Okay? I'm sorry about that. And even if we had won everything, you've still got Mitch McConnell there. They're not Republicans. They're not conservatives. Okay? Our hope was never in the elections. I'm sorry about that. But Warnock was elected, and that isn't the headline. I want to look at what this guy said. Warnock is a reverend, right? Graduated from Union Theological Seminary, very liberal. And in talking about questions, he famously said during the election that voting was a kind of prayer. You give yourself a headache if you think like a liberal. So don't try it.
Doesn't that make him kind of a pastor?
Yeah, kind of.
Read the Bible very well.
So he was asked about reproductive justice. That's what he called it. He was asked about abortion, and he calls it reproductive justice, right? That's what the Black Lives Matter is all about, justice, right? So this is reproductive justice, to be able to abort as many babies as we can. I believe unequivocally in a woman's right to choose. He said, I am a pro-choice pastor. Let's see, there was another quote I want to get. He was rebuked by this coalition of black pastors, not today or yesterday, but recently, this last year. And these black pastors said, we believe these statements represent grave errors of judgment and lapse of pastoral responsibility, and we entreat you to reconsider them. He was a youth pastor. I don't know if, was he the pastor finally?
Same church, though, that Martin Luther King.
Right. Well, dirty little secret that most people don't know about. Martin Luther King, back in the day, and these are his words. I've read these in his words. These are the things he says. He said, I looked around for a model. What would be the best model to use to promote what I want to promote? And he landed on the church. He said, that's the best place to go into, infiltrate, take over, and I'll be able to promote my ideas through the church. Where he got this idea from was what was going on in South and Central America back in the 60s when he was doing this, was communism. Communism infiltrated the Catholic Church. And long story short, Martin Luther King was a communist. And he did not believe in the resurrection. I've searched for how you could find he was a Christian, but I haven't been able to find it. He said the resurrection never happened. Christianity borrowed that from other religions, right? So you can't trust your Bible. Warnock is another step or two level worse than him. And now he is a social justice warrior helping women have abortions as much as possible. And so he's 100%, he said, an pro-abortion pastor. And yesterday I read about it. Here it is on their website. Restaurant refuses to serve customers because they are pro-life, pro-family. This happened in Richmond. I'm assuming that's Virginia. And they had it all set for them to have a meeting where they would go over strategies and think about where they've been and what they've done, where they're going to go with it. And at the last minute, this restaurant said, we don't like what you are doing, and so you can't meet here. There's a case before the Supreme Court right now, unless they settled it today, where a Colorado website designer, I believe, said that he would not, in good conscience, be able to design a website for this LGBTQ group. And so they've sued, and it's made its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's dealing with this. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. As a church, we won't be going to an LGBTQ plus XYZ web designer asking them to design for us. We wouldn't do that. But that's what these people want to do. They want to make, and I've said this, I've watched this develop through the 80s. This gay bunch are not going to be satisfied for you to let them exist. That's what tolerance is. Tolerance means I'm not going to shoot you and kill you. That's all tolerance means. That's the word they used, though. That's not what they meant. I always said they would not stop until they make you rejoice in their sin. You can't even just let them do it until you say, until you rejoice in it, they won't stop. Sodom and Gomorrah. As in the days of Sodom, so shall it be. Okay, enough of the headlines. So as we make this assessment, we figure out where we are prophetically. The reason why we've been doing this study for the last almost 3 years is because the timetable has been accelerated off the charts. So the formation of a unified political, economic, and religious, a one world government, a one world religion, and a one world economy. We see this actually coming into focus right before our very eyes. We've talked about this at length. I can spend a lot of time on the social credit score system. Now it's called ESG, which stands for Environmental, Social, Governmental. That's a part of the Great Reset, and it's already in place. The big banks were told by Biden and these elites in charge of the country now, you don't loan money to any corporations that don't fit this. And the first ones on the target were the oil companies, the energy companies. They could, you know why they haven't been drilling? All the politics and all the news and all, they can't do the drilling because the big city bankers have been told not to loan them the money. Okay, that's directly Biden. No matter what else is true about permits and all that, that's just all so much smoke and mirrors. It's all about the money. The ESG is already in place. So they want to digitize everything. That's what the Great Reset folks have said. They want to digitize everything. That comes down to, and now we know the president signed it back in, I don't know what, March or whenever it was, for the Fed to begin to investigate a digital dollar system for the United States. Bitcoin, only it's our government Bitcoin. When they pull the trigger on this, you're not going to have any say in it. All of your physical dollars, they go away. I really hate to tell you this because it's kind of scary. You'll still have those dollars, but they'll be digital. They'll be in the bank, and the bank will say you've got this many dollars. But with ESG, you're only going to be allowed to have a certain carbon footprint. Meaning you can't buy a Chevy, you've got to buy an electric car. I mean, that's an extreme, but that's ultimately the direction they're going to go with it. They're going to control what you do. And, I mean, there's no fighting this. I've been looking for several years where I could put what little dab of money I've got so that it's safe. And you know the conclusion I've come to? There is no place that they won't have a reach. You can buy a can of beans. You can transfer that dollar and make it a can of beans. And you have the can of beans instead of the dollar. Right? You buy stuff. I've even thought about buying land, which I don't have enough money to buy the land, but even land won't mean anything, and property. But you can buy food and those kind of things that you will actually use. Okay, enough about that. Didn't mean to go that deep into it. And then the United Nations just had their up to Mount Sinai, their 10 Commandments event. Remember we talked about that for several weeks? The 10 Commandments of being a good, what would you call it? A good citizen of the world. You will follow these 10 Commandments in energy and saving the planet and all that. So these things are shaping up and coming into focus right before our very eyes. These things were disturbing and surprising for David to look at the world and see that's the way things were. The heathen were raging. The people of God were raging against God. And David was writing the psalm and startled by it. But this is a recurring thing. History does kind of repeat itself, doesn't it? And so revivals will happen. You know, this is the thing of the book of Judges. Israel would be with God, and then they would get off into idolatry, and then nations would come and overrun them, and they would be under the kings of the other nations, and then they would have revival and ask for a judge from God, and God would give them a judge, and this vicious circle. So that recurs not just with Israel, but with the world. Revival up and down, and that sort of thing. Happens with churches, happens with me too. There are days when I'm more spiritual, and there are days when I walk wayward, and God has to get my attention, and I have to repent. Don't look at me like that never happened to you. If that never happened to you, you need to start letting it happen to you. Right? So it's not static. This is always changing, and this is the turmoil that David saw when he looked at the nations. So we began to talk, when we ended up last time, about advanced spiritual prepping. We know what prepping is. Prepping is getting a hole in the mountain and getting all the food and bullets and everything. That's the preppers, right? We can't be that. We're not the Mormon church. That's not what that's not the biblical message to us. But I believe that we have been called to be spiritually preparing for things to the extent that we can. And I've put these in different layers, 4 different layers. The obvious layer is the physical, the food, and the water, and emergency supplies. You know, your government tells you need to have so much of this stuff in your basement. I mean, that's just common sense. If you're not doing that, you need to do it. And it doesn't have to break the bank to do it. When you go buy whatever at the store that you eat, a can of beans, buy 2. And every time you go to the store, buy 2. And pretty soon you will build that up, and then you will eat them as you go. And in the end, you will just eat them if that's all that's necessary. And if things don't go bad. But things are going to go bad. And all kinds of emergencies can come upon us. Tornadoes and earthquakes and hurricanes, though we don't have too many of those around here. Fires. So, you know, in preparing for a fire, for example, you know, it's just smart, it's a wise person, that all of your digital stuff in your computer at home, that shouldn't be the only copy of that. If all you've got is that computer at home, you need to make a copy of it and take it someplace else, so if that burns, you've still got that. That's just smart. You may never have thought of doing that. That's true of paper your insurance information and that sort of thing. You need to make copies of that and have it someplace else in case it burns.
I heard somebody the other day on the radio saying that it's a good idea to go ahead and take screenshots with your phone of your personal documents, even though they're saved in the cloud. Then you have another copy that's, available.
Yeah, the old saying is, 2 is really only 1. 1 is none. 2 is really only 1. 1, if that's all you've got, is 1. You don't really have that. A number of things can take that out, and then you don't have anything. But if you have 2, you really only have 1. Okay, so computer backup and all that, you need to wear a belt and suspenders. You need to have a backup. You need to make a mirror copy of your computer and have it someplace so if your house burns down, you've got to replace it. So enough of that. That's layer number 1. That's just smart. You need to walk around your house and think about that. And for the insurance company, for example, for a long time, it's been good advice from the insurance company that you take a video camera and you video the stuff in your rooms in your house and your stuff. So if you put in, a call to them and say, my house burned down, you have to replace this. You've got an actual visual to say to them, it wasn't a Volkswagen, it was a Mercedes-Benz, right? Okay. Layer number 2. We talked a little bit about this last week. So you need to have not only some extra food and water in your basement, but if things really go badly, you need to do what's called compassionate preparations. You need to have an extra box of cereal, the kind that you're not going to eat, but it was cheap to buy, and have that on the shelf. So if somebody comes to your door and they're hungry, rather than say, all of my food's for me and my family, and you send them away, and they come back and burn your house down, right? Send them away with that box of cereal. Layer number 3, preparing for those who will be left behind. For a long time, I've known people who made video of them presenting the gospel to loved ones that they knew would be left behind, and leaving that for them to be able to see in case you see a bunch of people missing and you know you were wrong and I was right. Here's what you need to do. And leaving behind Bibles and things like that. Maybe a love letter to your children. If they're rebellious and not listening to you, write a love letter to them, telling them what they need to do, and put it in a Bible and leave it where if you're raptured out of here, that Bible's still left behind, and your loved ones find that, they'll either burn it or read it. That's what I call layer number 3. Layer number 4 is redeeming the time. If we're going to be prepared for what's coming, we need to redeem the time. This is how Paul put it in Ephesians 5:16, way back in his day. Redeeming the time because the days are evil. Well, if they were evil then, we've cycled back around to at least as bad as that. And I believe far worse even than what is in Paul's time. But we need to redeem the time. In other words, today's over for the most part. You're not getting this one back. Best you've got is tomorrow. Take advantage of that day. Redeem that day. You need to think about that as you wake up every morning. I've only got one shot at this day. I need to do in this day what I need to do. Colossians 4:5, Paul put it this way: walk in wisdom toward them that are without, redeeming the time. Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. I have different taglines that I have at the end of all my emails, depending on what mood I'm in and who I'm sending it to. And one of the tags at the end of my emails, one of them is, there are 2 rules in life. How does that go? There are 2 rules in life. Never tell everyone everything you know. And then it ends there. I'm not telling you the second one. Don't tell everybody everything you know. Anyway. So you don't have to tell your neighbor, your child, your enemy, your whoever you meet at the gas station. You don't have to say things to them that do not move it in the direction of the gospel. For example, you're pumping gas next to somebody and you start up a conversation. You say, "Thanks to Biden." That doesn't move the gospel forward. Not even a little bit. All it does is maybe they will agree with you about that, but it may be that they're a Democrat and you just offended them and they're not going to hear anything you say about the gospel. Now that's just an illustration. You don't have to say everything that's on your mind. You need to be strategic about what you do say. And I believe we're coming up to the time even more than that. Cindy Newland was schooling me on our Facebook and YouTube and some things that she said we can do for me to move it to the next level with some things. And I told her, I said, now this is assuming that tomorrow it's not going to get so bad we have to go underground. Yeah, that day may be looming out there for us. And then in Luke 21:28, Jesus said, when these things begin to come to pass, then look up. Don't be discouraged. Right? These Bible studies that we're doing don't need to discourage you. Jesus is the answer. He's going to rescue us one of these. Lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. Wouldn't it be sad to know all the things that we've been talking? And lost people know all the stuff we're talking about. I mean, even lost people who don't know Jesus don't like what Warnick is saying. Half the country in Georgia, at least, doesn't like it. But if they're not a Christian, they don't have the hope. We have the hope. This is not all there is. Joel Osteen's wrote a dumb book, Your Best Life Now. My best life is coming. It's on its way. They're called the rapture. 2 Timothy 4:2. Paul said, but watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. Now he said this to Timothy, but it applies to you and I the same. We have a ministry from the Lord as well. Philippians 4:9, he said, those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do. And the God of peace shall be with you. And this is the last one. What I've called corporate watchfulness in redeeming the time. How shall we live? Hebrews 10:25. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. What was the day he was talking about? The return of Jesus. The closer you think you are to that, the more we need to be a family. Encouraging, challenging, sometimes rebuking, helping. We need to be a family. Okay, that's that. That ends Psalm 2. And next week we will take up something more.